Every single day, thousands of people share stories online that they can't tell anyone in real life. Too strange, too disturbing, too hard to explain without sounding crazy. Some of those stories are exactly what we're covering today. Welcome back, Creepy Crew, and let's get into it.
About 4 months ago, I finished a 12-hour shift in the ER around midnight, and my head was splitting. I'd been on my feet since before noon, short-staffed, dealing with angry families and one psych guy who tried to bite me. By the time I clocked out, the fluorescent lights felt like they were stabbing behind my eyes. I knew I had some ibuprofen somewhere at home, but that meant rummaging through junk drawers while my brain pounded. Stopping at the 24-hour pharmacy in the shopping center felt easier. Safer with security, cameras, not that lonely drugstore by my apartment. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars and a janitor's cart near the grocery store. I parked under a light by the main entrance, locked my doors, and sat for a second with the engine off. When I finally stepped out, I saw him standing by the ATM to the left of the doors. Tall, dark hoodie up, hands in his pockets, except for the right one with a red scorpion tattoo on the back. His face was down toward his phone, but his head stayed slightly turned in my direction. My chest tightened for a second. I did what I always do when something feels off at work and mentally checked the scene. No one else outside except him, pharmacy lights bright, clerk at the register, security cart still in sight. Not exactly the middle of nowhere. I told myself I was just overloaded from 12 hours of dealing with drunk relatives and unstable patients, and a tall guy at an ATM wasn't automatically a threat. So I walked to the doors at a normal pace, grabbed a basket, and headed for the painkiller aisle. I found the bottle of ibuprofen fast and got in line. There was an elderly woman in front of me carefully dumping coins onto the counter, apologizing while the cashier counted them one by one. Normally I'd just zone out, but my nerves were buzzing, so I started scanning the aisles. That's when I saw the guy again in the cosmetics section, holding a lipstick like he was thinking about buying it. He wasn't looking at the display though. He was watching me in the mirrored panel behind the makeup. Our eyes met in the reflection, and he jerked his gaze away a second too late. That was enough. Instincts kicked. I slid my card across the counter the second the woman finished paying and snatched the receipt before the cashier could even offer a bag. I stuffed the ibuprofen into my hoodie pocket, walked straight out the doors, and forced myself not to look over toward cosmetics. My car was to the left, but my feet turned right, toward the Starbucks on the corner of the building. If he really was following me, I wanted to find out in a place with people and cameras and someone who could call for help. Going straight to my car felt stupid now. Starbucks was almost empty, just a barista wiping the counter and 2 students half asleep over their laptops. I picked a table right by the front window where I could see my silver Honda and most of the parking lot. I ordered a small latte I didn't want, just to have a reason to sit there, and pretended to scroll through my phone. 5 long minutes passed before the pharmacy doors slid open, and he stepped outside. He wasn't carrying a bag, no receipt in his hand, just that phone, and the same slow walk. He finally stopped beside my Honda. From my table I could see him lean toward the driver's window, checking if anyone was inside. Then he took the handle and gave it a quick pull. The car rocked and stayed locked. He didn't look embarrassed or surprised. He just stepped back, raised his phone, and snapped a picture of my license plate, flash popping in the dark. That was when I quit worrying about seeming dramatic and decided to act like this was real danger. I stood up, went to the counter, and told the barista to call security because man was following me and I panicked. Security showed up in their electric patrol cart about 2 minutes later, an older guy maybe in his 50s with a serious, tired face. He came inside first, talked quietly to the barista, then walked over to my table and asked if I was the one who'd asked for help. I said yes, and pointed through the window at the man who was now just standing near my car like he was waiting for someone. The guard followed my finger, squinted, and his whole posture shifted a little, more alert. He told me to stay inside, that he'd go talk to him and see what was going on. I watched through the glass as the guard drove the cart over and parked a few feet from my Honda. He stepped off and started talking to the guy, hands open and calm, like he was trying not to turn it into an argument. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. The man in the hoodie shrugged, then gestured back toward the building, like he was confused why anyone was upset. At one point, he pointed straight at my car, then at his phone, obviously trying to sell some story. The guard planted his feet, arms crossed now, nodding but not looking convinced. After a minute, the guard turned and pointed back toward the cafe where I was sitting. The man followed his gesture and looked directly at me through the window. Even from that distance, with glass between us, I felt that stare. No smile, no frown, nothing. Just locked on me like he was memorizing my face. Then he broke eye contact, turned, and walked quickly toward an old white Chevy Suburban at the far end of the lot that I hadn't noticed before. He got in on the driver's side and just sat there with the lights off while the guard came back toward the store. The guard walked inside and told me he'd asked the guy what he was doing by my car. He said the man claimed he thought it was his friend's vehicle, then changed the story and said he was just checking out the model because he was thinking of buying one. The guard said the whole thing felt off, but the guy hadn't actually broken in or touched me, and this was private property, so all he could do was tell him to leave the immediate area. He offered to escort me to my car so I didn't have to walk out alone. We went out together, him slightly ahead, scanning the lot. The Suburban was still there at the far end, engine now running. I unlocked my Honda, got in fast, and hit the lock button before the door was even fully shut. He waited while I started the engine, reminded me to go straight home and call the police non-emergency line if anything else happened. Then he gave a small nod, climbed back onto his cart, and drove off between the rows of cars. I pulled out of the parking lot, and as soon as I hit the main road, I called my roommate Lauren on speaker. I told her, probably louder than I meant to, that I was being followed by some guy who had been messing with my car, and that I was heading straight to the police station on Maplewood instead of going home. While I was talking, I checked my rearview mirror and saw the white Suburban pull out from the far exit of the lot and slide in behind me, staying about 3 cars back. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands were slick on the wheel. Lauren went from sleepy to fully awake in about 1 second. She said she was grabbing her keys, leaving the apartment, and meeting me at the station. She kept me on the line, telling me to stay on main roads, not to pull over anywhere dark, and not to get out of the car until I was right in front of the building. I did exactly what she said. I drove past the station once and saw the Suburban still hanging back in the mirror. I looped around a few blocks, came back again and passed it a second time, dragging it out until I finally spotted Lauren standing under the bright lights by the entrance, phone in her hand, watching the street. The second I saw her, I cut into the parking lot lane, pulled right up near the front doors, threw the car in park, and ran inside. I glanced back through the glass and saw the Suburban stopped across the street facing the station, engine running but no one getting out. The duty officer at the front desk saw my face and waved me over before I even opened my mouth. I told him everything from the pharmacy to the parking lot and gave the best description I could of the guy and the scorpion tattoo. He wrote it all down, then went outside with another officer to check the Suburban. I stood next to Lauren by the doors and watched. As soon as they started walking toward it, the Suburban took off fast around the corner and disappeared. The officer came back in and said they'd gotten the license plate number and would run it and contact me. He told me to stay with someone I trusted that night and to call 911 immediately if I saw that vehicle again anywhere near my home or the hospital. I ended up crashing at Lauren's place with the deadbolt locked and her big dog sleeping outside the bedroom door. I barely slept, just lay there listening for engines that sounded like that Suburban. 3 days later, a detective called and said they'd identified the owner. He didn't give me every detail, just that the man had a history of similar incidents where he followed women from late-night stores and watched them but never actually made a direct threat or put his hands on them. The detective told me to be careful, keep documenting anything weird, and said that without direct contact or threats there wasn't much more they could do besides keep the report on file. It's been about 4 months now, and I haven't seen the Suburban or the man with the scorpion tattoo again. But I don't shop alone late at night anymore, and I always check my mirrors in the parking lot before I get in my car. remember the exact second my life turned into a nightmare. March 15th, 2:47 p.m., when I opened an email with the subject line, "Finally found your studio address." That email came a month after I shot a corporate event for some IT company downtown. Standard gig, nothing unusual. I'd done hundreds of those before, moved through the crowd, took a few hundred shots, backed everything up, sent the link, got paid, forgot about them. Nothing weird happened that day. No arguments, no drunk guy in my face, nobody acting like they even noticed me. A week later, I uploaded the final gallery to the agency's cloud, ticked it off in my spreadsheet, and moved on. Then the first email arrived. No subject, just a polite block of text saying he'd seen me at the event and was impressed by my professional approach. At first, I thought it was some networking thing, but the detail was wrong. He mentioned the exact lens I used most, the way I kept circling to the left side of the stage, how I never stood still for more than a few seconds. He said it was fascinating to watch how I moved through the crowd. Then he asked if I did private sessions, said he'd love to book something one-on-one. I read it twice, feeling this slow, heavy discomfort, but I still answered. I wrote that I only took commercial work through agencies and didn't do private shoots. Short, neutral, something I'd send to anyone. I should have ignored it. Instead, I hit send and went back to editing, not realizing I'd just confirmed he had a live line to me. The emails kept coming, faster each time, every 3 days, then every day. The second email described me instead of my work. My height, my hair, my confident but tired walk. He described the can of energy drink I bought at the bar, the way I shredded the label during breaks. The third one mentioned my habit of checking my phone every 10 minutes, and how I always frowned at the screen first, like I was expecting bad news. He called it endearing. By the fourth email, I wasn't skimming anymore. That one had my studio address written out completely, buzzer code and all, plus a comment about the old nameplate still being on the door. I never posted that address anywhere. Only clients and a few friends had it, and those details weren't in any message or invoice. I pulled my site apart, checked every social profile, scrolled back through years of posts looking for a slip. Nothing. I checked the cloud gallery link from the event to see if metadata had leaked anything. Still nothing. The only way he could have gotten that address was by following me from somewhere. Probably from the event, maybe from home. I blocked the email and told myself that was that. Next morning, a new email came from a different address, same writing style, no subject. Then another. I stopped opening them on my phone and only checked them on my studio desktop with the door locked. The fifth email was just a list, dates, times, and short notes. When I left home, when I came back, where I got coffee, where I ate lunch on Monday. 2 weeks of my life broken down into bullet points, including the day I overslept and left 20 minutes late. He'd been keeping track, in person, long enough to notice my delays. I searched my apartment and studio that night, room by room. I checked smoke detectors, picture frames, the router, behind wall art. Looked for pinholes in the ceiling, small black domes, anything that didn't belong. Then I went to the garage and crawled under my car with a flashlight, checking the wheel wells, bumper, the trunk lining, even inside the spare tire well for a GPS tracker. Nothing. No cameras, no bugs, no magnets, nothing that would give me an easy answer. Whoever he was watching the old-fashioned way, staying close enough to log my movements, but smart enough not to leave hardware lying around. Somehow that felt worse than finding a device I could just rip off and throw in the trash. The next morning I printed every email, clipped them together, and walked into the police station with the stack under my arm. I expected to be brushed off, but when the desk officer saw the movement log, his face changed, and he called a detective. We went over everything in a small office that smelled like stale coffee. He asked if I'd recently broken up with anyone, screwed over a client, argued with someone online. I hadn't. They traced what they could, but he told me all the IPs led back to public Wi-Fi at different coffee shops. Too many faces, too many cameras, nothing they could actually act on. He said there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting it, but he advised me to stay with family outside the city for a while, install cameras, change my routines, and stop posting anything in real time. I drove home, sat on the edge of my bed for 10 minutes, then started packing. A duffel with clothes for a month, my main camera and one lens, a hard drive with active projects, laptop, chargers. I called my regular clients, told them I'd be unavailable for a bit due to personal reasons, but their current jobs were safe. No one pushed for details. By late evening, I was on the highway heading to my parents' place in the suburbs, watching every car in the mirror like it might be him. When I arrived, I didn't tell them the truth. I said I needed a break from the city and wanted to save money, that I was tired of freelancing alone. My mom was just happy I was home. My dad asked careful questions about contracts and deadlines, and I deflected, saying work was slow and I wanted to reset. That night, I lay in my old room surrounded by boxes and gear, laptop open on the desk, and I kept checking my email every 10 minutes, waiting for the next message. The last email arrived the day after I filed the police report. I opened it at my parents' house, sitting at their kitchen table with coffee going cold in my hand. It was one sentence. "You shouldn't have called the police. Now I'll have to do things differently." I read that line a few times, trying to work out what differently meant. Was he bluffing? Or did he already have some other plan? I checked the sender and the header, hoping for some mistake I could pass along, but it was just another throwaway address. I thought about calling the detective, but my parents were in the living room and I didn't want to explain, so I decided I'd forward it in the morning. I barely slept that night. I lay on the bed, then ended up in the chair with the light on, my laptop open, refreshing my inbox every few minutes. Every noise in the house made me jump. Pipes, the fridge, my dad coughing. All of it sounded like somebody moving where they shouldn't be. Every so often I pushed the curtain aside and checked the street for a car I didn't recognize. Nothing changed. Morning came, and then another day with no new message. I forwarded the email to the detective with a note, and he replied that he'd add it to the file and alert the department. A week went by like that, tense. 2 weeks later, he called to say they had traced one of the emails to a guy in a neighboring state, already on their radar with serious mental health problems and a history of stalking. According to him, they'd picked the man up after an incident, and he was now under psychiatric observation with police supervision, which was to mean I could start breathing again. I moved back to the city after a month and tried to slide into my routine like nothing had happened. I reopened the studio, flipped on the lights, checked rooms, locks, windows. Everything was where I had left it, but I walked opening closets and looking behind doors like I expected someone to be hiding there. I changed the locks, put up a couple of cameras, and gave a spare key to one friend I trusted. Then I started taking work again, commercial shoots, a few headshot sessions, and eventually another corporate event downtown. On paper, my life looked normal again. I got up, drove to jobs, edited files, sent invoices, but normal wasn't normal anymore. I watched my rearview mirror, looking for the same car behind me through too many turns. I paid attention to anyone who seemed to linger near the building or stare at the studio windows. I scanned coffee shops before ordering, looking for someone who seemed a little too focused on me. I tightened everything online, new passwords, two-factor on every account, every profile private, no more posts about my schedule or where I was working that day. The detective told me the guy they believed was responsible was still under supervision, and that I was safe. But safe feels different once you know somebody spent weeks charting your life without you noticing. Some nights when I'm backing up photos, I still refresh my email, half expecting a new message from some fresh address. Someone else who noticed my professional approach at an event. I keep shooting because this is the only thing I really know how to do, but there's a part of me that never stops waiting for the next person who decides I'm not a photographer. I'm a project. I spent a year working security at a private rehab clinic for people dealing with addictions. Standard job, patrolling, checking rooms, sometimes helping medical staff with difficult situations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the rules were clear. My shift was nights, 12 hours, mostly making sure nobody slipped out to score or hurt themselves when withdrawal kicked them in the teeth. You learn pretty fast that half your job is watching doors, and the other half is watching people's moods. The building had a few wings, but the one that mattered that night was the basement level where they kept the hydrotherapy room. It was simple. Several shower stalls with tiled partitions, one big tub at the far end, benches along the wall. Official rule was that the room closed at 9 p.m. Every tap off, lights out, door locked. After 9, only 2 keys existed in play. Mine, on my belt, and the head nurse's, locked in the safe at the station upstairs. The logic was obvious. No unsupervised water at night around people who were detoxing, depressed, or both. I did the close-up the same way every shift. Around 8:45, I'd tell whoever was in there to finish up. At 9 sharp, I'd walk through, check each stall, shut any taps, check that the tub was drained, then switch off the lights and lock the door. That particular night, I remember a skinny guy from detox complaining that he just got warm, but he shuffled out wrapped in a towel. When I did my sweep, everything was dry. No dripping, no lingering steam. I locked the door, tugged it once out of habit, clipped the key back, signed the time in the log, and moved on. Around 3 in the morning, I was finishing a round in the basement. Nights in a clinic are noisy in a controlled way. Distant TVs, somebody coughing, the occasional call bell. As I came down that corridor, I heard something that didn't fit. Clear running water from behind the hydrotherapy door. Not a drip, not a gurgle in the pipes, but a strong, steady rush like a shower on full blast. I stopped, listened a few seconds to make sure I wasn't mixing it up with a toilet flush from another room. No. It was continuous, same intensity. The strip at the bottom of the door was dark, no light on inside. I tried the handle, still locked. I took out my key, opened up, and hit the lights. Room was empty. Benches bare. No towels, no clothes, nothing. In one of the middle stalls, though, the shower head was going full force. Water pounding into the drain, steam rising. Both taps were turned all the way to the stops, like someone had cranked them hard. I went straight in, got my sleeve wet, turned them off, then opened and shut them a couple of times just to see if anything felt loose. Everything felt normal. I checked the other stalls in the tub. All dry, no footprints, no puddles outside that one stall. I stayed maybe another minute, listening. The only sound was the ventilation. I told myself it was probably some weird plumbing burp, a valve not seating right somewhere in the system. I shut the lights off, locked the door again, tested the handle, put the key back in my pocket, and finished my round. I decided I'd leave a note for maintenance and mention it to the head nurse at shift change. The clinic wasn't huge, so 10, maybe 12 minutes later I was back on that same corridor, heading toward the security office to update paperwork. Before I even saw the door, I heard it again. Same sound. Strong running water behind the hydrotherapy room. That time I just stood there a second, because I knew for a fact that nobody had gone past me and nobody had signed that room out. I checked my belt. Key ring was still there, heavy as always. I knew the head nurse was upstairs at the station. Small building. You always know roughly where people are. And I also knew her key stayed in the safe at night. Policy. Triple checked in audits. I unlocked the door again, flipped the lights on, and my chest tightened. Same stall, same shower head, full pressure. Both taps twisted all the way open. I went over everything I'd done before in my head. Night work makes you doubt yourself, so I really tried to be honest about it. Could I have left it half open? Missed it? Still, I remembered standing right there a few minutes ago, turning those handles until they wouldn't move. I stepped in again, shut the water off hard, held each handle at the end of its travel, feeling for any give. Nothing. The other stalls were still dry. That's when I stopped treating it like some minor weirdness. One freak plumbing thing, fine. Twice, in 10 minutes, behind a locked door where access is controlled by 2 keys that haven't moved. That's a security issue, not just a maintenance one. Flooded room we could mop. Uncontrolled access to a locked area we couldn't shrug off. So I locked the door again, checked it twice, wrote the exact times and what I'd seen into my notebook, and headed straight to the office phone. I called the night maintenance tech, explained that I had a shower in a locked room turning itself on after close, same stall, twice, and that I'd already shut it off. He complained a little under his breath, but he said he'd come in. About 15 minutes later, he showed up with his tool bag, hair still messy, clearly dragged out of bed. I walked him down, unlocked the hydrotherapy door for the 3rd time, and stepped back while he went to work. He started with that same stall, turning the taps, watching the flow, then shutting them off and on, fast and slow. Then he opened the access panel behind the stalls and checked the valves and mixers, had me stand inside and open different taps while he watched the pipes. After that, he ran his hand along the main line, listening and feeling for vibration. Finally, he shut every tap, checked each stall and the tub, then went to the main feed into the room. "From what I see, the system's fine," he said. "If you close these, they stay closed. Valves are tight, pressure's normal. You might have had air in the line, but that doesn't just spin handles on its own. Not like you're saying." I asked him if there was any way those taps could open themselves from a pressure surge or something. He shook his head. Said the only way he could imagine was somebody physically touching them. And even then, it was too much of a coincidence that it'd be the same stall twice. Then he said to be safe, he'd shut off the water supply to the whole room from the main valve in the service basement, so even if something was sticking, nothing could actually come through until day shift. We left the room and went to the stairwell. I waited on the landing while he went down to the lower level. A few minutes later, he came back up a little out of breath, told me the hydrotherapy room was now dry from the building side, and that I should let the morning maintenance guys know he'd closed the valve. He handed me my key, grumbled about losing sleep, and headed out. I went back once more and checked the room, mostly for my own peace of mind. I tried the taps in that stall. They still turned, hit the stops, but nothing came out. I shut off the lights, locked the door, did my last rounds, and finished the shift without hearing that water again. After he left, the water never turned on again in that room at night while I worked there, at least not on its own. But a few hours later, on morning shift, one of the older nurses waited until we were alone by the coffee machine, gave me a long, tired look like she'd been expecting something like this, and then told me something I wish I hadn't heard. On that morning shift, the older nurse waited until the hallway was empty before she explained what she meant. She asked if I was the guard from Hydro, and when I said yes, she said there was a reason staff hated that room. She told me that 3 years earlier, before I ever worked there, a man in his 30s had almost killed himself in the big tub during a routine hydrotherapy session. Back then, she said, they treated it like a normal treatment room. One therapist, one patient, door closed, everyone trusting the paperwork that said the guy was stable enough. He had some back problems and anxiety, nothing special for that place, and he went into the tub just like any other day. She said the therapist stepped out when the hallway phone rang, told the patient he would be right outside, and was gone less than a minute. When he came back, the man had slid under and stopped moving. They pulled him out, did CPR on the floor, called an ambulance, somehow got him back, and psych transferred him as soon as he was stable. After that, the nurse said, the clinic rewrote every rule about that room. No more leaving anyone alone in water, no more solo sessions, and the door stayed open unless 2 staff were inside and watching. They made it clear during training that if you heard running water behind that door when no session was booked, you were supposed to treat it like an emergency until you knew what was going on. She said that was why she took what I told her so seriously. She had me repeat everything, every time, every check, who was on duty, where the keys were. just to make sure there was nothing simple we were missing. When she was satisfied, she just nodded and told me I had done what I was supposed to do, that maintenance cutting the water was probably the safest outcome we could get. Then she said, if that room bothered me, I could take the long way around the basement as long as my rounds were still on schedule, and nobody would complain. I took that offer. It added a couple of minutes to the loop, but after hearing about the tub, I didn't feel like walking right past that door if I didn't have to. I still checked it like I was supposed to. Tried the handle, looked at the frame, wrote the times in my log, but unless I needed to unlock it for staff, I stayed in the other corridor. It wasn't about being scared of the place. It was more that once you know someone tried to die in a room like that, you treat it with respect and you avoid pushing your luck. What stays with me is that the taps opened twice while the door stayed locked and my key never left my pocket, and the head nurse's key sat in the safe at her station the whole time. The tech told me the valves were fine and there was no reason for a handle to move on its own, but he still went downstairs, shut the supply to that room, and after that, it never happened again. Sometimes on later shifts, I'd still stop outside that locked door for a second and listen, half expecting to hear water I knew shouldn't be running, but it stayed completely quiet every single time. I left after the year was up, but I picture those taps and feel relieved I never faced a third time. When the headlights of that silver Dodge appeared in my rearview mirror for the third time, I knew for sure I was being followed. It was about 3 in the morning, and I was driving back to our logistics center through the industrial zone on the edge of Phoenix after an emergency run out to a driver. At that hour, the place is dead, just locked warehouses, empty loading docks, and a few streetlights. No other cars at all, just me and that SUV. At first, I told myself I was just tired and jumpy from too much gas station coffee. Then I started watching the way they moved. They would rush up until their grill filled my mirror, sit on my bumper, then drop way back, then come charging up again. No attempt to pass, no steady speed, just this weird, pulsing distance that did not make sense. I took a right turn I did not need into a side street between dark warehouses. The Dodge took the same turn. A minute later, I took another random turn, sharper this time, and they followed that too. 2 weeks earlier, management had sent out a warning email about robberies in this exact zone. Box trucks and full semis were getting boxed in, doors popped, electronics and construction materials gone in minutes. One of our drivers had tried to resist and ended up in the hospital. I read that memo at my desk, rolled my eyes, and figured it did not really apply to dispatchers sneaking around in old company sedans. Now, sitting alone in that gray Civic with a strange SUV matching every turn I made, I understood how stupid that was. I should probably explain why I was out of the office in the first place. I am a night shift dispatcher at a big logistics center outside Phoenix. I am 30. I work 10 at night to 6 in the morning, and I am usually glued to 3 monitors, a radio, and a stack of paperwork. I keep track of where the trucks are, match the GPS data to the bills, and argue with drivers about appointment times. I am not a driver. On a normal night, I do not even see the street. Around 2:30 that night, the tracker on one of our containers dropped offline. Not just any load either. It was a box full of high-end electronics headed out of state, insured for something like $2 million. Without an active GPS unit, the system at the state line will not clear it, which means the driver hits the checkpoint and turns into an expensive paperweight until somebody fixes the problem. Every minute that thing sat still would blow up schedules and insurance reports, and, in the end, land on my desk. Normally we have a night courier for stuff like that. That guy was out sick, and the backup lives on the far side of town and was not answering his phone. Inside the building, it was just me and 2 bored security guards in the gate booth. My senior dispatcher called my desk from home and did not waste words. He told me to grab a spare tracker from the equipment cage, take the company Civic, and run it out to the driver at his first stop, a rest area about 30 minutes away. I signed out the keys, picked up the box tracker, and drove out. The run there was uneventful. Morales backed his truck into a corner spot. I handed him the unit, and he had it installed and online in under 5 minutes, before rolling back onto the interstate. Going home was not an option. My apartment was the opposite direction, and I was not going to lead a tale there. The only safe place was the yard with guards and cameras. I turned toward it. The Dodge surged up beside me and smashed into my left side. The hit shoved Civic toward concrete, but I yanked the wheel back and kept off the wall. They slammed me again, and I knew I would not reach yard. Ahead, scrap yard gate open, and I knew night shift inside. I yanked the wheel and shot through the scrap yard gate. The Civic slid but stayed straight, and in the mirror, I saw the Dodge turn in right after me as I cut between rows of containers toward the only lit building, the office. I jumped the curb in front of the entrance, hit the brakes, and the car stopped crooked. I ran to the metal door, pounded on it with both fists, and yelled that someone was trying to run me off the road and I really needed the police. Footsteps came from inside, then the lock turned. A security guard in a blue uniform opened with a radio in his hand, and 2 workers behind him. I blurted that a silver Dodge had followed me, hit me twice, tried to push me into the wall, had just driven through their gate, and begged them to call the police. The guard stepped past me, looked toward the gate, and talked into his radio, saying there was an emergency at the entrance. One worker pulled out his phone, said he was calling 911, and asked for basic details. The Dodge had stopped just inside, engine on, headlights our way. The guard pointed at the camera over the gate, and another on the building, then raised his voice and said into the radio that everything was on video, that they had the plate, and that police were already coming. He repeated it louder. I stood there shaking, waiting for doors to open, but instead the SUV suddenly turned and shot back out through the gate. The worker stayed on with the dispatcher, giving our address and a description, and the guard moved me just inside the doorway but kept himself outside, watching the entrance until sirens came closer. After about 15 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled in. The officers talked to the guard and workers, then walked around my Civic. The left side was caved in, the driver's window shattered, the front bumper cracked and low. One officer said it looked like deliberate side hits from a larger truck. They took photos and brought me into a small office and wrote down my statement. In the camera room, the guard pulled up the footage. It showed my Civic through the gate and the Dodge behind it, but the angle on the gate camera was bad and the plate was half blocked. Only the last 3 numbers showed. The officers said the case would go to detectives, and later my supervisor told me they had checked every silver Dodge with those digits in the plate within 50 miles. Every owner either had an alibi or the vehicle was parked somewhere else that night. Nothing came out of it. The company did its own investigation, added security, put more cameras on the parking lots, and made a rule that after 10 at night, nobody leaves the logistics center alone. You walk out in a group or with a guard. Because it happened on duty, they also paid for a taxi for a month and sent me to a psychologist their insurance uses. The morning after the crash, I woke up sore down my left side with a bruise from the seat belt. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the impact again. I kept the therapy appointments and went back to work, but I will not drive alone through industrial zones at night anymore, and I still bolt awake because in my head, I am back in that Civic with the mirror full of those headlights and waiting for the next hit.